Coming up on this week's episode of Search With Candour, I am joined by Eric Hoover, and we're going to be talking all about SEO in an AI world. What tools you should be using for content creation, how LLMs help us to do better work and be more efficient. And yes, we're finally diving into AI as a topic since we touch on it pretty much every single episode. So stay tuned for that on this week's episode of Search With Candour. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Search With Candour. I am your host, Jack Chambers Ward, and this week I am joined by Eric Hoover. Eric and I are going to be talking all about how to do SEO in an AI-powered world. I know we've touched on this subject a few times on the show, to say the least, pretty much every single episode at this point. AI is an unavoidable topic, but Eric and I are going to dive into the specifics of how to use LLMs, chatbots, and AI in general to enhance your SEO work, how to get more efficient at creating content, what best things to use LLMs at in the content creation process, even talking about some technical SEO elements, some digital PR, some link building, and everything in between. It's a really interesting conversation. Eric is a fascinating guy who has really been on top of this and paying attention to AIs for a very, very long time, even before they were kind of popularized and we were all using ChatGPT and Gemini and things like that over the last few years. And stay tuned for that after a word from our sponsors. Search With Candour is sponsored by SE Ranking. SE Ranking has been a trusted name in SEO for over 10 years, since 2013. And SE Ranking has evolved from a rank tracking tool into a comprehensive SEO ecosystem. And they have recently gone through a brand evolution, updating their visual identity to better represent their commitment to innovation, user-friendly interfaces, and cutting-edge technologies. With this evolution, SE Ranking bridges the gap between SEO and innovation. They want to empower people by equipping SEO professionals and businesses with intuitive, innovative solutions and precise data to make informed business decisions. SE Ranking try to make things more easy to navigate. With clean UIs, customizable dashboards, and a responsive customer service, you can get easy access to the SEO data that's important to you and your business. SE Ranking offers a suite of machine learning and AI-powered tools and features designed to enhance your SEO strategies for businesses of any size. I know I talked about this a little while ago, but SE Ranking have launched their AI Overviews tracking feature. It's a brand new tool that allows you to track AI search engine snippets and gain insights into competitors' performance in AI-generated search results. And they've evolved their content marketing as well. AI-powered content creation and optimization tools help users develop SEO optimized content faster than ever before and more efficiently as well. So come and experience the SE Ranking evolution. Get 15% off any annual subscription plan on your first order by using the code BRANDEVOLUTION at checkout. This promotion is valid all the way through September 2024, so you only have limited time to go and check that out. Like I said, use the links in the show notes or the video description down below. Use the code BRANDEVOLUTION. You'll get 15% off and enjoy your first year of SE Ranking and all of their amazing features and brand new tools.
Sarah here.
And me, Tasmin.
And don't forget me, Jack.
So, gang, what are we all doing here?
Jack, why don't you do the honours?
What an honour. Thank you so much. Drum roll, please.
Sorry, we don't have that sound effect, and unfortunately, my skills just don't stretch that far.
Oh, fair enough. Maybe next time. But we do have some very, very exciting news for you all, because not one, not two, but 3 successful live podcasts. We are back once again. Search With Candour and the SEO Mindset podcast are teaming up again to record a podcast in front of a live audience.
Yes, that's right. And I am very excited. So join us for a raw and authentic conversation about career planning, but without the overwhelm. We'll be sharing practical advice, tips, plus our own personal experiences.
I am so excited, and this is all free to attend. There's going to be pizza, snacks, and drinks included. Again, free. It's happening the night before Brighton SEO. We're starting at 7 on Wednesday, the 2nd of October. Tickets are now up for grabs, and last time we sold out. Well, technically we sold out twice. So if you are interested in joining us, please, please, please grab your tickets now before they all go.
And help us spread the word as well. If you or your colleagues or your friends are going to be in Brighton or attending Brighton SEO coming up in October, the more the merrier. Please all come along and join us.
We'll pop a link in the show notes so you can get more information and grab your tickets. We look forward to seeing you on the night.
You may recognise my guest this week from appearances on some of my favourite SEO podcasts, such as SERP's Up and Voices of Search. He's been working in SEO for over 15 years, is an SEO director at Jellyfish, and importantly, is just a bigger fan of cats as I am. Welcome to the show, Eric Hoover.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on.
I think one of the cat ears is sticking out in the background right around there. You might have it cropped out, but making an appearance nonetheless.
I'll do it. I'll do a quick pan across to show off the cat. If I was at home, I'd have the same thing. Thankfully, I'm in the studio, so no cats on my end. But yeah, let's talk about cats briefly, very briefly, before we get into the topic. Tell me about your cats. Tell me about your history of cats. How many cats do you have? What are their names?
Oh, great! Oh, this could be a whole other hour. We have two cats. So one was my wife's and one was mine before we met, and now we've merged them together as we have merged our relationship. Her cat is Bessie, the one that's my thing is mirrored, so I don't know where to point. There she is. She's sleeping on my shirt. She is flat-faced Persian. She's very adorable, quite loving. And then the other one, Marcel, who was my cat, is your typical knock stuff off the counter, kind of jumps and attack plays with you. Just a wonderful boy, but a little on the aggressive side, which is why the door behind me is closed, because we can't really have them commingling too much. But they're great. I'm an animal person in general, but cats are just great. They're great for the city. I live in New York City. They're easy. You know, if we both go into the office, we leave them with some food for the day, leave some toys laying around. When we go on trips, we have someone come feed them. You know, it's pretty easy.
Yeah.
But yeah,
my wife and I have a very similar setup. Yeah, definitely. We have two cats, male and female. Our female, Toothless, is 6, and our male is just about to turn 1. By the time this episode comes out, he will have turned 1 year old. And he's called Hiccup.
Nice.
And exactly the same. I think Toothless is our Bessie, was like older, chilled, like female cat.
Yeah.
And then Hiccup is the Marcel, where he is just leaping at everything, playing, claws out, teeth out, absolute maniac. Chaotic little ginger male cat is our Hiccup. But we're not here to talk about cats as much as we could do an entire podcast about
exactly.
cats. We've already nearly had a podcast about Star Trek. We're about to have a podcast about cats. But no, we are actually here to talk about SEO in an AI world. And it's become a little bit of a running joke, and I joke about it being a bit of a drinking game of how long can we go into an episode without mentioning those two dreaded letters, right? The AI conversation that crops up wherever you go in SEO these days. We're kind of embracing that. Maybe don't play the drinking game this week, because we're going to be talking about it pretty directly, and I think this is why I really wanted to have you on the show. I know, shout out to Morty from Wix and the guys over there at SERP's Up who connected us, and I really, really enjoyed your appearance on the show talking about this. And we're going to kind of explore that topic a little bit more and get into some workflow ideas, get into the future of search and how AI is shaping that. And I think, like I said, it's something we kind of touch on pretty much every single week at this point. But I kind of want to start off with, why is this something you want to talk about so much? Is it because it is on, the hot topic, it's on the tip of everyone's tongues at the moment? Or is this something you've been thinking about for a long time?
It's something that I'm just personally really interested in. Outside of search in general, I think the concept of AI is very interesting, because I think, as we mentioned before the call, it has this like almost sci-fi background to it. Like I'm a huge nerd. I love thinking about the future in the sense of like a Star Trek kind of world where we're living with these sort of AIs and computers that are our companions. They're not taking over our lives and all that sort of stuff. Hopefully it doesn't turn into the Terminator Skynet version of that. That's always the fear. But it looking at it in the sense of it being a companion, as something that is with you on your day to day, helping you everything from stuff like search or your regular tasks, reminders, all that sort of stuff, where it's a little more predictive. We have so much of that technology already. You've got Alexa and Siri and whatever Microsoft is calling theirs this year. But having it as an assistant, like a literal assistant, I think is really kind of where we're headed long term. And in a way where it doesn't have to be, oh, you're telling it to do something. It's coming back to you and reminding you or giving you a relevant update on something that's going on in the world or your life or something to that extent. That to me is very super interesting. It's also the sort of governance around it all, the keeping it from becoming that sort of Skynet kind of thing, I think is really, really interesting. There's a really good, I don't mean to plug someone else, but I read a really good book, interesting, called Unmasking AI. The author's name escapes me at the moment. It's Dr. Joy something, and we'll have to maybe put it in the notes after or something. But it's an interest.
Dr. Joy Buolawmini?
Yes, thank you. Wonderful.
I'll put a link in the show notes.
Right.
You're free to plug stuff and mention stuff as much as you want.
Yes.
For those, I'll put all the resources in the links in the show notes if you want to go and check that out, folks.
Awesome. Highly recommended. Talks about the bias in AI. She's someone who's worked with AI to uncover that bias in both a scientific way and use it in basically art performances. I hope I'm representing her work properly. But it's very, very fascinating, very interesting. And I think that alone is something to be really sort of researched and reviewed and taken, not taken lightly. As she points out many times in the book, how things like, the AI that drives driverless cars, running over, mannequins of different color because it doesn't recognize it basically as a person because the face of the mannequin isn't white, stuff like that. Super fascinating, somewhat frightening stuff to really consider. So all of it is really interesting to me. And I just happen to work in SEO. So now that it's become very prominent in search and in organic search specifically, it's like right up my alley. It's like, oh, this is my time to shine.
You finally cross the SEO and sci-fi sides of your brains and just like,
yeah, seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. I think fascinating and kind of frightening is the perfect way to describe how a lot of people are feeling about AI at the moment. Like I said, as much as I joke about it on the show and it's semi-become the little like boogeyman of like, oh, someone's going to mention AI. Ah, there we go. Of course, so it's inescapable at the moment. What you were saying about it being essentially like a virtual assistant, right? I think is where we're seeing a lot of the positive work for people using it in their day-to-day SEO work, whether it's content creation, whether it's technical stuff. There's so many different elements that it can contribute to it, and I really love to go behind the scenes a little and draw the curtain back. Like what you put in the show notes of treating it like a new teammate, I think is a really excellent way of putting it. And for me, that has been a big part of my kind of dipping my toes into using Copilot, using Gemini, using ChatGPT, all this kind of stuff, and playing around and testing a few different options of, what we mentioned before, I do a movie podcast, and that involves summarizing the plots of the films we're going to be discussing. So if the audience isn't aware of what we're talking about on the show, we give a quick little plot synopsis of like, hey, this is, Star Trek 5. We're going to talk about this. Here's this thing. God needs a spaceship. No, he doesn't. End of story. Like we summarize it in like 200 or 300 words, and using something like an AI, like an LLM to do that kind of thing, to translate it into a different tone of voice or summarize stuff has been so useful for me, even outside of my SEO work. Like I said, this is just podcast stuff. And I know Mark and the team here at Candour have been using a lot of that where it comes to rephrasing, changing, summarizing, all that kind of stuff. I think it has been really good at that for a while now, and that keeps evolving. That seems to be like the most basic use, if that makes sense. And LLMs have been so good at that for so long. It's kind of I don't know, inexcusable is maybe the wrong word, but like you should be doing that. That is such an easy and everyday use for me. For you, what are the kind of like main day-to-day stuff that would make you think like I would consider it a new teammate? What are the kind of the key points for you when it comes to using it as part of your day-to-day work?
Yeah, well, real quick to that point, I think especially if you're in marketing, whether it's search marketing or something else, if you're not utilizing it in some way, like there was a whole thing about when ChatGPT first started to get big, oh, it's going to take your job. It's not going to take your job. But if you don't learn to use it, you're really you're really limiting yourself. I feel like
people who
I'm not
are
saying,
using it will take your job.
yeah, well, sure, exactly. But yeah, it's a new tool, and that goes into how, the use of it for a more day to day way of utilizing it for SEO. It can be a mixture of things. So it starts with the basics, absolutely. Like, we've absolutely used it at Jellyfish to help expand on our keyword research. There's, so many times where you use different tools. You might use a search metrics or a keyword planner or SEMrush. They're going to give you the basics based on your seed keywords, but maybe you want to build that out even further. You could pop it into an AI, you could pop it into Gemini or GPT, and give just more and more synonyms, phrases that it believes are going to rank better or rank for different audiences. If you've given it that information, the one thing to remember is, especially when you're working with something like GPT, you can really continue it from an ongoing sort of conversation, so it continues to learn. That's something we try to do. We have our own little like backlogs of all the research we've done for clients. We pump that in, and it kind of gives it a better idea of where to start. But it's also really tactically, it really can help cut down on time tactically. We've used it for creating content briefs. We've used it for translating content for various clients. We've used it to help optimize product pages, thousands and thousands of product pages with all the different variants for our e-commerce clients or apparel clients that have 15 different variants of a shoe or a sweatshirt. Having it do that sort of first or even second pass before it goes to the team and then is optimized or QA'd again by a human, because that's the very pivotal moment where you really need to make sure you're not just copying and pasting it and putting it on the site, because we've seen some really strange things come out of the LLMs from time to time, and we don't want that on our client site, or it's just insanely irrelevant. But using it as that sort of first and even second pass with some of the work that we do. And it is like I said, with using it as a new teammate, it's always good, especially when you work in an agency, to have a different or a new set of eyes on something, because I work on technically three currently accounts. I have team members who I manage who work on 5 different accounts, and some of those accounts they've worked on for years. After a while, it's going to be hard to be constantly thinking of something new, thinking of something hip and cool. We work at an agency. Sometimes you just need to do the BAU work. You need to just get it done. So having a fresh set of eyes on it to give you a different perspective or give you some new ideas on a subject or even just on keywords is really super helpful. And that's what AI can do. And from there, I've even gotten to the point where I'm trying to even utilize it as a way to do a bigger competitive analysis. So again, I'm not having it do the entire thing, because it's only going to be able to get so far, given the limitations of some of the AIs, like GPT, Gemini. They can't always read website content, or they can't always read certain types of documents. I find it funny that if I try to give ChatGPT a Google Sheet to read, it can't read it. But if I export it into an Excel and upload it, then it can read it. Obviously, it's because it's a link versus an actual doc, but it's just sort of kind of funny to me how it, not that it can't, but has been told that it shouldn't do that or can't or won't do that by the developers. But pumping this information, giving it a massive keyword list of what a client versus competitors are ranking for, having it break down and categorize all of those keywords, then asking it continued questions like, who is ranking better? Why are they ranking better for this category of keywords? Where's my client ranking with this subset, this category of keywords? How could they rank better? Copying and pasting, because it can't go into URLs, some page content of competitors saying, compare this to this page content for the brand, that kind of stuff. So having it be more, again, it's still the initial phase of a competitive audit, but helping build out those initial ideas and those initial insights to really just cut down on time, so that me or my team can spend more time doing the more strategic, the bigger thinking kind of stuff, where this initial sort of review and audit categorization is already started, so that we have basically more brain bandwidth to do the bigger picture strategy work.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really the conversation I've been seeing from a lot of people using it in a smart way, is that automating the time consuming manual stuff that, for want of a better phrase, basically anyone could do, right? So you can have a real expert in that subject in SEO come in and say, okay, now I've got the basics, which again, anyone can do. I can actually apply my expertise to this thing to make it be the best that it can be. And I think that's where a lot of, like you said, automating things, having it be a first draft and then reviewed by an expert team member and things like that. Obviously, we're talking about not just, like as you said, copying and pasting straight from GPT straight onto your clients' websites. Don't do that, folks. Please don't do that.
Please
but I
don't.
think there is definitely a relevant thing, like you said, where there's that first and even second draft thing. From my background in writing, I know an editor told me years and years ago, never publish your first draft. Like your first draft should always be just the nearest thing to just a stream of consciousness. Just get something on the page, because the most intimidating thing is the empty page, is that just that hovering cursor on a Google Doc or on a Word doc or Pages or whatever it is. And for me, that's where a lot of it comes into it. I am a much better editor, curator, fine tuner than I am an ideas kind of person. And for me, when you can get that first draft that is just, okay, here's just some bullet points to get the ball rolling, to get the ideas flowing, for me, that helps hugely when it comes to getting something out there rather than nothing, and then being able to fine tune that process and go through it. And like you said, it can be so time saving when it comes to those things of, right, instead of me typing out all of these bullet points or going around these different sites and copying and pasting all of this stuff into a doc so I can then, filter out all the rubbish, that power where you can just automate stuff with essentially like 2 or 3 clicks of a button is, I think, is going to be a big game changer for a lot of people. We've seen it, obviously, and we briefly talked at the beginning there of like, oh, it's going to take everybody's jobs. People were saying that when the all-in-one SEO tools arrived 15, 20 years ago. Oh, Ahrefs is going to put my agency out of business. SEMrush is going to put my agency out of business. All this kind of stuff. But really not. People, like you said, you learn to use these tools, and if you're able to adapt and integrate it into your workflows to make yourself more efficient so that the human people behind it can actually put their best knowledge and expertise to use in the right place, and like you said, save the brain bandwidth for the important stuff, rather than I've spent 6 hours digging around, crawling all these URLs, and now I have no energy to actually write the content.
Exactly, yeah.
There you can save all your energy for actually doing the important stuff. And I really want to dig into the product page stuff as well, because that's definitely been something I've seen a lot of people talk about. You mentioned Feed Gen AI in the show notes, and I know that's something I've spoken to a couple of people about. We have a few e-commerce clients here at Candour, and I've been chatting to them with optimizing the shopping feed and talking about how that can, like you said, all those variants and stuff like that. Can you talk a little bit about how you're bringing that into the e-commerce side of things? I think you mentioned like product variants and stuff being a
exactly
example there, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I won't take full credit for this. This was the work of our data science team where I currently work, and my SEO team, and myself too. But I'm not going to just say I did it all myself, because it was quite a build out the initial time you do it. But yeah, essentially taking what exists already. So we're lucky enough that this was an existing client, taking what we already had within the product feed and basically running that along with things like all the variants, keywords we wanted to target, tone of voice information, all that sort of stuff through the feed gen open source tool, and coming with this output of, again, what it sort of felt, I believe it uses Google Gemini, what it feels would be the most click inducing titles and descriptions for all the different variants. So, the client, I won't say the name, but it had over, I think, including in variants, over 10,000 products within the shopping feed. So that's a lot of manual work to do. And it also was a lot of work once it all came out of the tool to, of course, go in and have the team QA it and make tweaks here and there where needed. One thing we've talked about, we haven't gotten there yet, is having the tool learn enough where we could run it back through the tool and have it do an initial QA again. So it's sort of checking its own work still having to have humans check it at the end. You don't want it to end up being one of those Obama putting a medal on Obama memes where it's just like, of course the work is great, I did it. So, but again, having it know all of that knowledge previously and us having all that information previously to feed into it is obviously super helpful. And it was a huge success. It was, it cut down on the time of all those builds by something like 50%. I think after a few months, we ended up, or it might have just been a few weeks. I always forget the actual stat. I should probably have it up in front of me. We grew the conversions, the organic conversions. This was just, the free listings, the organic shopping feed were up 25%. It was, in the double millions of digits, or like, 20, 30 plus million in revenue just from those listings over a very short period of time because of those AI enhanced, as we were calling it, AI enhanced optimizations coming from that feed gen tool, and just from the ideas of our team and the clients saying we want to work together on this process and build it out. And now we're doing it across the board. This is a client that has multiple e-commerce brands, different types of apparel and whatnot, and throughout the globe. So now we're doing in EMEA, we're doing the same practice for the site we did it for in the US, we're doing it for in EMEA, and then we're going to do some of the other apparel brands in the US afterwards. We're holding off because I don't know when this will come out exactly, but we're hitting peak holiday season here in the States, Cyber Weekend and all that, as I know you've got over there too. So we're, testing and all that gets put on hold. Obviously, you got to be careful there. But after the holidays, I think we're going to dive right back into it. It's just been really, really successful to the point now. Recently, again, I won't name names, but another agency, came to one of our clients and kind of pitched an idea of like, oh, we have this AI tool that finds synonyms and keywords, and we had to go to the client and say like, oh yeah, we're already doing this, by the way, so don't fall for their don't start paying them for something that we actually do already. So but yeah, it's nice to be one of the first out the door. If I could toot Jellyfish's horn for a minute, they're one of the agencies that went heavy on AI at first. So Jellyfish is owned by a company called Brandtech. They're very big on. They have a tool called Pencil AI that they require that builds out more of display social kind of content utilizing AI, but in a very similar process where it's just trying to understand the landscape and the brand and give it the best result of what it thinks will be, the most conversion driving result. So we're lucky that this company has gotten very big on utilizing AI, hasn't been shy about it, has been the first out the door with a lot of AI tools and optimizations. If anyone higher up than me at the company listens to this, they'll be very pleased that I said that. I don't think they will. It'd be nice if they did, but they'll be very pleased to hear me say that. But it's true. It's nice that we have so much out there already and so much in production as far as AI goes. We're not being shy about it, which is nice.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of agencies are going to have to go, like you said, not being shy about it. And I think we're going to see, as we always do in SEO and marketing in any industry, you're going to get a bunch of snake oil salesman type people that are going to come in and, like you said, come in with this big old pitch of like, yeah, it's AI, it's revolutionizing, we're doing it bigger and better and faster, and all that kind of stuff. And then, thankfully, like you said, they had a conversation with you, like, yeah, we're already doing that. Like, yeah, don't worry about it. Like, they're trying to sell you something that we're already doing. So
yeah, exactly.
Don't worry about like trying to go off and, like you said, AI stealing your jobs and all that kind of stuff. Incorporating it into, I think shopping feed for me is such an obvious answer when it comes to it just being essentially just a spreadsheet of data that you feed into a thing that is such a manual process of taking that information and chucking it through. That is something that should easily be automated. I know there are plenty of plugins that have been doing that for a while, but when it comes to things like shopping feeds and things where you have, like you said, it can be an example of tens of thousands of different variants and different options and all this kind of stuff, that is exactly where I like to see AI stepping in and helping out. And I think when it comes to the content side of things, I feel the same way. You mentioned content briefs earlier, which is something I absolutely love and I'm very interested in how that process goes through, because I see it fairly similarly in a way to how the shopping feed works. For me, a content brief is essentially the same template each time, right? So you've already got that kind of structure that you're giving the LLM, which I think is a huge part of kind of giving that initial push in the right direction, rather than write me a content brief about this thing and just leaving it to go off on its crazy own, like you said, hallucinations, and that's where you got all the weird stuff. Pointing it in the right direction with, is this type of client, here's the topics and here's the subheadings that I want you to discuss, all that kind of stuff. Is that am I kind of along the right sort of lines for your content process?
Yeah, exactly. You have to give it more than just the basic information. We give it a list of keywords. We give it, again, the tone that the client or the product is going for,
the brand guideline kind of things.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Feed all that information in so that it is. You don't have to. You could still get a okay content brief with just the keywords, but then you're going to have to do more editing. Or it's going to have to go back to the client. You do the back and forth feedback, which as a former content writer specifically, even prior to my SEO days, there's no put in your contract how many rounds of feedback you limit, because if you don't, you will get plenty of them. But yeah, trying to limit that as much as possible as well. But again, at the end of the day, it's saving everyone time. I mean, time is money everywhere, but I work at an agency. Time is literally money, as is every minute, every 15 to 30 minute increments we put in our timesheets. Like, any way you can cut down on that from that standpoint is great. But again, it goes back to giving yourself the brain bandwidth, which is a phrase I just made up during this call, and I'm going to use it all the time now.
You need to trademark that right now, mate.
Yeah, seriously. I'm sure
brainbandwidth.com right now.
I'm sure someone else said it, and I just heard it. It got stuck in my brain. But that's really what it's about from my standpoint, is saving that. So,
as far as I can tell, brainbandwidth.com is available. So
okay, great.
we should jump on that right now. It's available now for just $5,500. So
great!
Yeah. Something I've really talked about with our content team here, especially when it comes to the digital PR side of things and the content creation that relates to a lot of the link building side of things, well, that the outreach and the digital PR side of things. I know I had BB the link builder on a few months ago. That was episode 100 of the previous season, and BB was talking about how much she had used, essentially, like you said, as a way to brainstorm ideas, to bounce ideas off of. Perhaps it will come up with something you would never think of in a million years. And for me, that is always, like I said, I have a pretty clear idea of what I know and what I can talk about and stuff. But when I see that empty page, or I see I've got 5 things, I need to write 10 things, like I'm all out of ideas, I'm out of energy, I'm out of brain power, brain bandwidth, as we were just saying. Having that extra side of things to bounce ideas off of, I think is really, really useful. Has that been part of your process for the content creation side of things, even just the initial headlines, titles, all that kind of stuff as well, right?
Yeah, and not just for digital PR, even just for your basics of SEO, like coming up with page headings and title tags, just asking it, again, based on all the information that you've given it, variants of, can you write 5 or 10 different versions of this, and maybe even asking it if it has the information. Which do you think would rank better based on these keywords and stuff like that? Yeah, just having it really be a writing assistant. And this is where, as someone who is a writer and has a background in writing, I get a little wary about, because it's a little touchier in the content world, AI. But I do think that, again, it's that important tool, but it can't replace, because there's something about, and maybe it's just the way that the AIs write, but there's always, or maybe it's just because I personally have spent a lot of time in these tools, you can sort of tell, you still get a bit of a feeling of when something is written with AI, whether it's a certain way that it says, a certain tone, a way it begins or ends an article. I love the joke I always do is GPT will always end an article with "in conclusion," every time. It never fails, especially, well, at least if it's a comparison article, never fails to do that. So, but at the end of the day, and this goes back to sort of our basics of SEO and content marketing in general, you're not writing for the search engine. You need to make this information sound like a human, written for a human, make it be engaging to the person who's looking for that information. Because at the end of the day, that's really what we're doing. We're not just, I mean, obviously we're trying to get our sites to rank or our brands to get clicks and things like that, but you want this information to be impactful and useful for the user, for the person reading it. One of my very first jobs was at Razorfish Health, doing a lot of pharmaceutical and medical type content. And that's always sort of the thing we would say in SEO is, we're really trying to help someone figure out what issue they're having, how they can manage it, or where they can go for more information or for diagnosis or whatever. When you're working for pharmaceutical companies, you kind of have to try and paint a better picture so you don't get a little depressed about the work. And I think that's the way we kind of did it. But, it's true. We're trying to, it's true in any sense that we are, or in any industry, is we're trying to get someone information that will hopefully be insightful or helpful to them. And you're only really, or at least at this point, I feel like you're only really going to be able to do that with a human stepping in. Even if you have the AI writing, multiple drafts of something, eventually you're going to need that person to come in and say, is this really answering the question? Is this really being helpful? How can I rewrite this to make it more impactful? Is it just giving me a list of things and saying in conclusion? I can't, I'm not trashing ChatGPT. It's, the people behind it are a million times smarter than I will ever be. But I just think those little tells are, again, as someone who spends a lot of time in AI, they're very obvious.
Yeah, definitely. I think that has been perhaps the most off-putting thing for me when you get into as soon as you kind of have that part of your brain switch, like you're unplugged from the matrix, right? And you can now see the code of like, okay, yeah, it always says in conclusion. The classic case is deep dive into something. That's every AI is like, okay, we'll start with this topic and now let's deep dive into the rest of the topic. It's like, yeah, okay, great, like brilliant. For me, when like I said, I'm using it for like, I'll continue to use the podcast example I was talking about, since I won't talk about client stuff, but the way it would summarize movies, I would write like, give me 10 bullet points to summarize the plot of Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, and it would give you 10 bullet points, and then it would add an extra paragraph that I didn't ask for. It was like, in conclusion, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan is considered one of the best Star Trek movies. It was released in 1982 and blah blah blah. I was like, I didn't ask for that. I don't need this extra waffle. Why are you waffling at the end here and concluding with stuff? I just wanted 10 bullet points that I can then expand myself and write this stuff myself. And that always frustrated me, and I think this comes back around to, like we were saying earlier, the way you work with LLMs and the way you integrate them into other toolkits and things like that. Being restrictive actually makes them better, and I think telling it really, really explicitly what you need avoids a lot of that waffle stuff. And I eventually have now been able to like fine tune myself and be like, okay, almost in the way that, and I know Mark was talking about this on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. We're so familiar with the way Google understands stuff. We've been working, I know you've been working for 15 years, Eric. I've been 5 or 6 years now. And there's that element of like, I kind of know what I need to put into a search bar to get the thing that I want. You need to tweak your language slightly and all this kind of stuff. And we'll get onto that when it comes to SearchGPT in a moment, I'm sure, in the future of search. But for me, that was an adjustment for me, going like, okay, do I need to write a full sentence and ask it a question, or just write 10 bullet points, or like, hello GPT, how are you? I need to do all this stuff. And of course, then coming back around to the Skynet thing of like, always be nice to your future
always
robot
be nice,
overlords.
yes. always thank it for the information it gives you. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. And I do wonder if it's, people like me to a lesser extent, but very much like you, working with being neck deep in AI so often. How much does that correspond to the people who aren't working in SEO or tech or AI and stuff like that? There was a study I spotted from about 18 months ago or so from Tool Tester that said over 53% of people couldn't recognize content written by GPT 3.5, and that rose to nearly 64% when they used GPT 4.0. For me, I feel like I can spot it. And again, this is maybe my naivete in many ways of like, oh, yeah, I can spot AI content. Yeah, of course. I'm sure there is plenty of stuff that was AI written that I had no idea. But do you think it's because we're going to kind of shift in that mentality and our understanding of how AI does stuff? Do you think as it evolves, it will become more convincing? Or will that kind of balance out with people's understanding of how it works, and we'll be able to identify more? What's the kind of, I guess, the kind of swings and roundabouts there of either side, the scales of AI there?
I do think it will get to a point where it will be much more natural of a language, which goes back to the sort of governance talk of, and you see it today now, where uh, tools will identify AI content, AI images. That's become a big talking point now, especially in the US with the election coming up, making sure that there's a little tag that says this is AI generated, or something that can read the image or view the image and say this is AI generated. I think that is going to become obvious. This is a very obvious statement, I think, but it's going to become pivotal to it, because it will eventually grow to a point where, and again, talking about AI as an assistant, I know plenty of people who use ChatGPT to write drafts of emails before they, tweak them and send them off, if nothing else for, saving time, or because they need to change the tone of the email. Eventually,
how do I sound less pissed off with this client?
Basically,
how am I polite to this person?
Exactly. But with that, eventually there's going to be it's probably in the near future, where you'll open an email or click reply, and some GPT plugin or something that lives natively within the tool itself, especially if it's like a Gmail or a Microsoft, it will say, oh, here's a draft of how you should reply based on the previous reply.
Gemini basically does that already.
It's true,
exactly.
Yeah.
It's already expanded, because you can obviously do the little automated, like, thanks, I'll look at that next week, or I'm away at the moment, I'll reply as soon as I can. You get like 4 or 5 word little auto replies, right? And Gemini, I know, is being tied more into Gmail and the whole, but it's doing a lot of stuff on Drive now. You can use it to like create new folders and clusters within Drive, and how that all works there as well. And I think that is a big part of, coming back around to, like, I think that's going to be a big awakening for a lot of people, of like, they're not using SEO, they're not working in our industry, they're not really worried about tech, but everyone kind of uses emails in their day job. And as soon as that little sparkle logo shows up, you're like, oh, what does that do? And you realize, like you said, you can essentially draft an email in a single click and be like, huh, okay, that's interesting. Does that work for me? How much time will that save people, like project managers or account managers, speaking from an agency perspective, who are writing dozens and dozens of emails to clients every single day? Yep. I think that's a really interesting part of bringing that to, taking it outside, I guess, of the SEO discussion, and showing it to people. And like having conversations with my wife, and I'm sure you have the same experience, Eric, with like me talking about, like, okay, here's Gemini, here's this thing, and my wife goes, what's Gemini? What are you talking about? I'm like, all right, okay, so Google I/O, there's a big thing, and da-da-da. It's like, so they have these things called gems now, and you can save this thing. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, so you can save like a pre-programmed thing and make it an expert. And I often forget sort of like how plugged in I am to the news and the tech news and the SEO news and all that kind of stuff. But I think we're reaching that inflection point, right? Eventually, everybody is going to be aware of this. Everybody, I think, kind of has a general idea of what AI is, how LLMs kind of do their thing very, very, very basically. But I think we're going to head towards that future where it's going to be more integrated into the rest of our lives, let alone the work we're doing in agencies, right?
Absolutely. I mean, my wife is a project manager for an architecture firm, and I think she uses AI almost as much as I do, with all the PM. Exactly. With all the PM tools, this kind of stuff we're talking about. It's funny. She knows what Google Gemini is, not because of me, but because when ChatGPT is stalling or not working, then she'll switch over to Gemini for something. But yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, just because we work in search and with so many tools that utilize AI, this is something across the board. It's a point I make when I talk to clients about utilizing LLMs and optimizing for LLMs and for AI. The point I make is that everyone is using AI constantly all day. Half the things on, if you have an iPhone, if you have an Android, half the things on there are powered by AI. If you're doing any sort of searching, voice search, searching on apps on Instagram or TikTok, if you're searching on Google or Bing, you're utilizing some form of an AI or an AI supported tool. So it's beyond inundated. We're beyond inundated with it at this point.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And there was a really interesting thing you linked to in the show notes. Again, pulling the curtains back here, talking about the content strategy side of things, and talking about the ranch style of SEO content strategy rather than the more traditional kind of skyscraper side of things. And for me, I think that is something that is really particularly relevant. I know we've been talking a lot about information gain and how relevant that is to thinking outside of just your typical keywords and just kind of like, ticking the usual boxes, for want of a better phrase, when it comes to your content briefs. Could you talk a little bit about how that kind of approach kind of, reframes and re-triggers SEO content in a way?
Yeah, it's funny. I've had this conversation a few times with internally and with clients. A few years ago, right before AI broke, we would start to sort of shy away with too much. You think about things like content blocks on a page. Like, for example, when you have category pages, product listings pages on an e-commerce site, for many years, we would do these kind of big content blocks at the bottom of the page, which generally a user wouldn't read because they wouldn't scroll all the way down to a page, or the page would continuously load with more products. But it's there for a search engine to read, and it's got internal links, and it's written for a human audience, but it's basically SEO copy. We started to shy away from that, either because clients don't like it or it became a little sort of gray hat. But now, with the way LLMs read through websites and understand websites, we've started to bring it back. We've started to bring, again, not in a spammy way, but we've started to utilize some of these, what I would even go so far as to call sort of gray hat tactics. I'm not going to say they're black hat. I don't think they're black hat, but they're definitely on the border. Really sort of build out these kinds of little bits of content that a user may or may not read, and it's written for a user, for that audience. But essentially, we want, in this case, not so much the search crawler, but we want the LLM to read and understand that information and potentially give it back to the user in some sort of, whether it's an AI overview or whether it's information on SearchGPT or ChatGPT. And when it goes to those types of content, those content styles of skyscraper versus ranch, for the record, anyone listening, I did not come up with any of these terms. They've been in the industry for a few years. I just think they're very interesting. It not only feeds into those more kind of granular bits of information for a large language model to understand, but it even sort of speaks to how consumers interact with and talk about content. The example that's always given for the skyscraper content is always something like a recipe, where it's got that gigantic bit of what in the search world would be like upper funnel information. But it's really the, my grandmother who was born in 1900 had this, and this gives this whole backstory before you get, all the way down to the bottom where the actual recipe you want is. Whereas, a ranch style piece would give you a bit of information, link you out to other pages that would give you more granular information about topics that were touched on at the top of this article, but then get you to sort of the really cheesy, I'm going to say this now, the meat and potatoes of the recipe information. Sorry. But, really building that more granular information out separately. And there's all like tactical structural things where it lives under the sort of same subfolder and all that sort of stuff. But that also, not only for the user, can be more engaging, it's better for the website, and it's better for the search crawlers and the LLMs that are trying to understand this information more succinctly. And I think that's really, when I talk about, optimizing for AI, for LLMs, it's just like optimizing for SEO in a way, is you're building this information out for the user. You're making it useful for them more so than the technology that's going to be reading it. Because, again, whether or not they actually read it, if it's a copy block at the bottom of a page, it still has to have that in mind. It still needs to be. It goes back to what I was saying before. It needs to be helpful for a person if they do happen to come upon it, whether on the site or in the section, a summary of an AIO. It needs to be useful for the person to really succeed. And I think that's the most vital thing that we can do as SEOs always, is make sure that we're giving that information to the user. And then in turn, unless Google goes a little crazy like they did over the summer, it will generally rank your site well or show your information in an AI overview.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to see, like you said, after the fairly disastrous launch that happened earlier this year, to the way that Google seems to be fine-tuning and tweaking how AI overviews are showing for specific topics, specific queries, coming back round to that ranch style of things, thinking about things in terms of search intent and topic clustering and things like that, rather than the individual keywords that you're targeting. I think that is kind of where we all need to be in terms of content these days. I feel we're, as much as I think a lot of the fundamentals and the basics that were true in the early days of the internet 15, 20 years ago that are still true now, I think really when it comes to thinking about how we create a domain and a site as a whole and establish yourself as part of those initial, EAT principles, when you were trying to establish yourself and prove yourself to be authoritative, be an expert, demonstrate your experience and grow the trust of your users, I think having a cluster of topics and relating all of those entities together and bringing it all together, like you said, spreading things out a little bit and then interconnecting all, whether that's thanks to the crawlers and that side of things, finding the links, or the users finding the links, I think that is a hugely relevant point for the overall strategy. And then tying that back around to how that then gives the information to things like SearchGPT, to AI overviews, where we've seen, optimization for feature snippets for about a decade now, I think, or so, give or take, for feature snippets. And it feels to me like a lot, obviously there was the whole freak out back in the day of like,
Sure.
feature snippets, everything's going to be 0-click now. And we feel like we're on another front now of the advent of 0-click SEO, right? Where people are now optimizing for the thing that appears on the SERP, and again, a lot of people say like steals your content.
Yeah.
But I think that's hugely relevant for building brand awareness and establishing long-term trust. If I see something that comes up multiple times, I think I gave an example the other day, by the time this comes out, this is the podcast last week, where I talked about one site was referenced like 5 or 6 times in a single AI overview because it links at the end of every sentence, essentially. That was like 5 site links for the same article. I was like, wow, that is a lot of real estate you're taking up on the SERP there. And I think that strategy is so relevant for talking about AI overviews, talking about SearchGPT. From your experience, what has the kind of reaction and then the strategy behind thinking about AI overviews from a content perspective? Does that just tie into that search intent and topic cluster kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, at least that's how I try to frame it. It's always the way I sort of sell it in, for lack of a better term, to a client is it's going to be useful in the near term and the long term, because while AI is still being tested and it may or may not be relevant to your brand or start showing up, cats moving in the background, so hopefully that's cropped out and not distracting. It's about now in the near term, you're still going to, refresh your content, build a better site experience, a better site structure. That's going to help you improve your visibility now in the way that search and especially SEO interacts with people currently. And that only sets you up for when we have more AI overview, or if Google ever starts doing that, they had teased the AI organized search results page, which I think is that's the one that scares me more than anything AIO can do, is them completely rearranging the first page of Google based on what a person is looking for.
A fully personalized page 1 SERP is terrifying.
It's terrifying, yeah. We'll talk about that another time. I don't need to have nightmares right now. The nightmare is explaining that to my clients, why their organic visibility is all over the place. But just it's really what it's setting themselves up for success now, and then when all that becomes more day-to-day experience of the user, they're already going to be in place to rank well within those AI enhanced elements.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way of thinking about it. And I think, again, it ties back around to a lot of the fundamentals and a lot of the core of good SEO work, for want of a better phrase. And I think that will still continue to be relevant. And I know we've seen the initial kind of feedback from some beta users and prototype looks at SearchGPT. How are you feeling about SearchGPT? Have you had a chance to dip your toes in? Have you seen much of the results and the feedback so far?
I've seen results and feedback in articles and LinkedIn posts. I'm still on the wait list. I got an email a week ago that said, "You're still on the wait list. You do not have access yet." And I was like, "Thanks for reminding me that I'm a loser that doesn't get access." From what I've seen, anecdotally, it's not at nowhere near the level of Google yet. It seems to be more closely tied to Bing results, which makes sense given the relationship between those two companies.
Using the bin index, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. But what was one stat I was reading? It was something. Oh, instead of, I forgot what the query was, but instead of getting 100 results, so 10 pages like Google, there were only 13 results on a single page, which again, is that really a bad thing? Because 100 results on 10 pages doesn't really do anything because no one goes off the first page anyway.
But exactly, right. Yeah. There was the where do you bury a body on like the third page of Google, right? Because nobody scrolls past. Maybe very occasionally people go, oh, I'll check out the second page. And as was demonstrated by Google rolling back infinite scroll, which happened a few weeks ago. And it was like, yeah, people don't really want to keep scrolling to find information. That's not really, we want the information as quickly as we can. And I think that's why AI overviews is kind of a counterbalance to that, right? And I'm very interested to see, like you said, how SearchGPT can evolve to a whole other topic we're not getting into, but the potential divergence of Google and it's the smashing of its monopoly and all that kind of stuff. Can SearchGPT be the thing that differentiates it from Google enough that other people will start using it outside of tech nerds like us, SEO nerds like us, who are aware of it? Will it break through to the mainstream enough to, I don't know, take a chunk out of the share of search that Google has held on to for the last 20 years?
Yeah, I think it will. I don't think it will be. There's not going to be a Google killer. The one thing to understand about Google is that Google
might be the Department of Justice.
Right, exactly. That's all it's going to be. It's like when you think of old. I shouldn't compare Google to the mafia, but when you think of old mob movies, what always brings the mob down? It's like racketeering, tax evasion. It's like the most boring thing.
They got Al Capone for tax evasion. Exactly.
Yeah. But that's really what it like. Google's not going outside of that. Google's not going anywhere. Their market share might be cut down. I think will be cut down somewhat, but it's not going to replace it because Google and Alphabet have trillions of dollars behind them to keep themselves a powerhouse on the same level. That's why I do think that SearchGPT will be a serious competitor at one point because OpenAI has billions and trillions of dollars behind them as well. So at the end of the day, we could all have the best user experience, but I think DuckDuckGo is great for privacy. Does DuckDuckGo have the budget that Google has? No, and that's why everyone uses Google. Sorry, I love DuckDuckGo. I don't want to trash talk them. They're not as big monetarily, and that's really what it comes down to, I think. There's certainly people might argue Bing is Microsoft, they've got billions of dollars, but Google has just become so much the brand of search. That's the other thing, is they've become the brand of search, that while Bing might have a little bit of a market share, it still doesn't have the notoriety, for lack of a better term, that Google has, because it's become the iPod of people don't even use iPods anymore. I was going to say the iPod of MP3 players. iPod is a brand name. Band-Aid is the example.
The Kleenex, right?
The Kleenex, yeah. Band-Aid.
Yeah.
Band-Aid is a brand name,
Yep.
even though you call everything you put on your finger a Band-Aid when you have a cut. So that's really what it's become. Between that and the monetary factor, Google will still be a powerhouse, but I do think SearchGPT will get to a point where it's integrated enough in people's lives, or within even just their, by way of their devices or whatnot, will become something of a competitor, a serious competitor, but it won't unseat Google. Again, like you said, the DOJ is the only one who could do that.
Yeah, I think for me, that has been a really interesting kind of glimpse into how search behavior has evolved over the years. Like you said, using Google as the verb. People don't say like, oh, I'm going to search for this thing. I'm going to Google it. It is a part
exactly.
of our lexicon and our vocabulary these days. However, having said that, and this blew my mind the other day, I found out that a lot of Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and here's me being in my 30s feeling very old, where it comes to searching stuff, they say search it up or search it rather than Google specifically. And I wonder, and I guess this will be our final kind of wrapping up big theory kind of big picture discussion, will be that, do you think that shift in behavior, just a small thing such as like the shift in vocabulary and shift in lexicon there, do you think that ties into how much the younger generations are so integrated into tech in their lives at an early age, right? Like I don't have kids, but I know my nieces, nephews, my friends' children, they're using tablets at a very young age. I remember getting my first phone when I was in like high school, and kids these days getting their, like my niece I think she's just turned 11, so, and she got her phone for her like 10th birthday. And I was like, oh my God, I feel so old that my niece is now texting me on WhatsApp and stuff, right? Do you think that shift through the generations and the integration of tech into our lives, is that a foot in the door for SearchGPT in a way where people will just be so used to using LLMs and AI, and it would just become a perfectly normal thing, like smartphones have become a perfectly normal thing for us, whereas they would melt your brain off 20 years ago? Would that be a kind of thing where SearchGPT has that foot in the door to be like, okay, Google isn't the phrase we use now searching is a thing, and SearchGPT could be the new answer?
Yeah, absolutely. Not only do I think that's absolutely correct, and I think that's what is happening and will continue to happen, but there's also not just the integration of the technology, not just the lexicon of changing it from Google to search it. I think something I see with again, Gen Z and is it even Gen Alpha? I don't even know. I've lost track of all the gens. It's that they are rightfully, I think, more skeptical and more anti the bureaucracy and the sort of capitalism of it all. Is like, oh, I don't want to Google it. I don't want to give Google my clicks or things like that. Even though giving OpenAI your clicks might not be, any better. The jury's still out, I guess. But, that sort of skepticism and hesitance to really just go to whatever the big corporate thing is, which I think is incredibly healthy and wonderful. I wish more people I'm somewhere between a zennial and millennial. I wish we would get more like that too. But I think that is also going to play into it a fair amount.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Eric. It's been a really interesting conversation. I feel like it feels like almost the culmination of so much of the little topics I've touched upon throughout the last few months. We're finally actually talking about AI in all its guts and glory, and it's been really fun. Feels quite therapeutic as well,
Oh, great, good, yeah. Listen, anytime you want to chat more, about this or about Star Trek or about Dune, let me know.
Absolutely. Well, if people want to hear your thoughts about SEO, AI, Dune, Star Trek, whatever it is, where's the best place to follow you and what you're up to at the moment?
My LinkedIn, which I guess you can post in the video and in the show notes. Yes. LinkedIn. I have a website, Eric Hoover Digital. I don't really update it as often as I should. I guess in theory you could reach me there because I have a contact page, but just go to my LinkedIn is probably the best.
Try LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, go and follow Eric. Like I said, I think you're doing some really interesting stuff. I've really enjoyed this conversation and the appearances you've done on other podcasts as well. I'll put a link for everything in the show notes. If you want to go and check out the articles, the resources, all that kind of stuff we've talked about, it will all be linked in the show notes down below. Thank you once again for joining me, Eric, and live long and prosper, I guess. It's a good way to sign it off, right?
Thank you.
And that wraps up this week's episode. Thank you so much for watching or listening, wherever you're watching or listening. Thank you to the sponsors who make this episode possible. And I'll be back very soon with some more fantastic guests and awesome topics. I'm going to be talking all about how translation and SEO should be working more hand in hand with Maria Scheibengraf. I'll be talking all about negativity bias and how that affects the way we search and the way we interact online with Julia Panozzo. I'll be talking about critical thinking with Noah Lerner and so much more coming up over the next few weeks. Of course, Mark and I will be back here in the studio doing a monthly recap of all the latest SEO news and important articles you need to know about. And since it's nearly October, we're coming up to the Halloween special, and we'll be doing another Halloween special, all basically focused around Halloween tips for SEO. If you want to learn about UX regarding Halloween stuff, you want to talk about trends, you want to talk about data, you want to talk about e-commerce ideas and tips and all that kind of stuff for Halloween, the Scream Queens, Miriam Jessier and Stephanie Walter, will be making their return to the show for the third year in a row, and we'll be doing a Halloween special coming out towards the end of October as well. So, like I said, amazing guests, really interesting topics, and of course, the live podcast coming up in October as well. If you're unable to attend in person, if you're not coming to Brighton on the 2nd of October, you can watch it on this very podcast feed. You can listen to it in audio and watch it on our YouTube channel as well. So stay tuned for that coming up in the next few weeks as well. Before the end of the year, like I said, loads of cool stuff coming up. So please do stay tuned for all of that. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching or listening, and have a lovely week.